Hey y'all, I am so excited to share with you the first episode in my brand new series called I'm Inspired, where I chat with people who inspire me in big ways. And I'm so excited that my first guest is Fox, soul animal reader extraordinaire. So excited to share our chat with you a little bit about Fox. Fox has been assisting people with what it is to be human through her intuitive gift of reading their soul animals for nearly 15 years. Her practice is fueled from her avid appreciation of nature, folklore, symbolism, behavioral psychology, and, of course, the animal kingdom. And she has an educational background in veterinary sciences. She grew up overseas and is now living nomadically. And when she's not connecting with people in person or via Zoom, she's spending her time connecting with nature spirits, enjoying film, music, and reading, as well as creating art. And the best way to reach out to her is via her Instagram at the Fox Lantern. No worries, I'm going to have her contact info in the description box below. Should you like to book in for a reading with her to find out what your soul animal is, I cannot recommend doing so more highly. Another little quick note for clarity purposes: her and I are going to be discussing my soul animal quite a bit, which is a Cecropia moth. So when you hear us talking about moths, that's why we're talking about them. We also talk about crow and the very important role crow plays for me, energetically speaking. So really excited to share this with you guys. Definitely let me know what you think in the comments. I so appreciate you being here and doing this.
Oh yeah.
I think that what you do is so special and unique, but also, I feel like there's a component to what you do that is so much more pragmatic, and has such a practical use in a way that I think might surprise a lot of people, because I think that there's so many people that are alienated by a lot of this new age world. And I
Hmm.
think that there are people like you, there are people like me that represent sort of like a new age, where it's a bridge between sort of the old school, Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, all of the OGs,
Yes. Yeah.
and kind of bridging it into a new age where, right, okay, well, that's wonderful theoretically. I love all of that. That's the foundation from which we, came essentially in some way,
Yeah.
shape, or
Absolutely it
form.
is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But in terms of like taking all of that ideology and translating it into a personal methodology where it's practical, it's usable, it helps you in a day-to-day way,
Hmm.
is so enormous. And it was a process, and I recommend you to just about anybody like who listen, or it comes up just organically. I mean, you've read for my sister, you've read for my sister-in-law, you've read for my husband, you've read for my stepchildren, you've read for my daughter. I mean, hello, you've read for my best friend. Like, I mean, the list is so long.
Thank you.
But I have really learned, and it's been so beautiful how that reading has evolved, because there is something that I remember thinking, like, back then. I thought, like, okay, so she gives these readings, but your animal never changes. So it's interesting over the course of these years for me to have an experience with what that reading was for me, to also evolve personally and have me
Hmm.
go back to you just through a slightly different context. Like, hi, okay, now you've read my husband. Can you give us a couples reading? So it's something
Yeah.
that, even though it was just that initial, it was really just a seed from which a tree grew with all these different branches.
I think I mentioned to you that I've been working with a CEO and his executive team almost 4 years now, and I meet with them almost every week. Um, they work for, or their company is in a cybersecurity company. So their whole thing is very
Oh,
like modern and not necessarily affiliated with anything metaphysical. And yet, one of the big things that the CEO really prides himself on and wants for all of his people that work in the company is an opportunity to grow, to evolve, to better themselves as individuals, and then thus that being an extension into the workplace. So it's been really interesting to check in with people and to, like, full transparency, it's not always about the animal, but what I can kind of fall back on for me on my end is I have to remember that that's the animal I'm talking to. So it's kind of like if your therapist was able to really understand you through the lens of like everything that they could map you out to be, then they're able to talk to you as you instead of like cookie cutting you into this standard person like, oh, has trauma, will do this, instead of that, like trauma in a zebra and how they respond to their situations based on that trauma is very different than a dog or a pelican, you know? So like it changes person to person. And that's kind of why I think what I do can help people over time. Yes, the initial session, like you were saying, is very like, this is the information, this is why it's applicable, these are some of the things coming up. But over time, it evolves because you are encountering new situations, new things to learn, new people, and new opportunities for your own growth and self-awareness and your own alignment, because that's really what I hope people get out of it is it's less about becoming something new and rather more about becoming who you really are after all of the people have told you otherwise. So it's a
This
form of
is
returnism for
That's
sure.
amazing. And it sounds like so much of what you just said is shadow work as well.
Exactly, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's integration. It's about coming to terms with yourself as yourself. And everybody's, at various points in that, some people further out than others and some people closer to home, but essentially it's what it is to be human. To be human.
Absolutely. Animals are something that are in our everyday lives in some
Hmm.
way, shape, or form. They're so accessible and we're fascinated by them in so many different ways. So I think being able to link up with an animal in that way is something that a lot of us, many, many, many of us, desire on like a very innate level. That desire, that
Yeah.
also connecting with that primal self and just going like, okay, whoo, the DNA within me before it was civilized,
Hmm.
that permission to go there and just express myself in that way. I mean, Sam will say to me, you said in our couples reading that if you put your hand down on a Cecropia caterpillar, you're going to get the spike. And he will say to me sometimes when I am feeling particularly spiky, he'll go, "Oh, a bit spiky today," and that's I know what he's talking about, and it's a shorthand where I'm not going like, "Oh, what do you mean?" But it's like no, yeah, I am. So what do I, yeah, I feel that. I recognize that. What does that translate to me as? What do I need? I need to slow down. I need to do my own thing. I need to
Nurture yourself.
separate. Right. Like that.
Yeah.
So that's a very distinct cue for me.
Hmm.
So I love that it's given us a shorthand. And I'll say to him, "Oh, are you at the bottom of the ocean?" And he'll just
Hmm.
nod. And I'm like, "Okay, I can't follow you there. Don't want to follow you
Yeah.
there. Go be at the bottom of the ocean. I'll see
Yeah.
you when you come up to the surface."
It's somewhat easier to accept a person and what they might be going through when you have that lens of the animal to look through, right? Because like, if we go on a whale watching tour and the orcas decide to dive and we're like, oh man, they didn't come closer and where are they? And they seem to have just disappeared. While we're sad because we're just like, well, we would have wanted more time with them. We would have wanted to observe them closer. We would have wanted to have our special movie moment with them. We can't fault them for doing what they do and how they do it. And so at some point in the whale watching tour, you have to just kind of accept that this is the way of things. And when I apply it to people, I'm like, look, like, I'm not saying that it's always the best way, or even we don't even have to venture into right or wrong at that point. It's just that that's what's happening. And that's a form of like allowance. That's a form of the concept of let them. That's all of
Yeah,
that is just kind of like, okay, I see that that's what you're doing. And the thing that you can count on, and I'll use the orca as an example, is that they have to breathe air. So they're going to have to come up at some point. Air is the realm of communication.
that's right.
So
That's right.
like, so that's something that if that's your partner, you can go, okay, The longer I sit here at the top of the water screaming and yelling and demanding that they come back, the longer it's going to take for them to want to come back up. So you just kind of stand back. You reach out and you try to grab one of those caterpillars and you get the spikes. It's because the caterpillar doesn't want to be messed with. Like it's a defense mechanism. Caterpillars, like we've talked about before, that's the longest period of time in the Cecropia moth's life, in any of those types of animals' lives. And that is a very key time to defend yourself because you have to get to the cocoon. You have to finally become the moth because at that point, it's the legacy that you're leaving behind, and it's not surprising that you would want to have boundaries when caring for the self.
That's so beautifully put, and that is a really perfect example of why what you do, it's so, I want to say helpful, but that doesn't even seem like a fair descriptive. It is an absolute transformative, life-changing way to go about things, because I also feel like it creates enough of a distance between what we're talking about when we're describing me and my needs and you and your needs, that I feel like it helps us meet each other in the middle of the field. Because if we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about my needs and you start talking about my childhood and why am I whatever, ugh, that's going to be hard for me to interact with you
Mm-hmm.
about that, because there's a certain judgment because of my shadow. I'm going to read into that. But if you start talking about my moth, my caterpillar, my cocoon lifestyle, ooh, let's go, because I don't, there's no judgment in it. That's understanding to me.
Very rare to find somebody who goes to a zoo and starts yelling at the animals to be other animals. I don't think I've ever seen that. Nobody does that. We think it's just a part of the innate human aspect of us, right? Because we are animals too. We're just a totally different kind of animal. And we have something so special as human beings, right? The ability to observe, to discuss, to translate, and to hopefully turn into something where everybody benefits. That's not always an easy thing for humans to do, but we have that. In some way we are guardians of this planet. One of my like not so vocalized hopes in what I do is that people, when they start learning about these animals, they find a deeper respect for how we're all interconnected. I really like maybe when you're sitting in your house and you find a whole bunch of moths in your closet, you might get angry because they might be chewing holes in your clothes, but you might have a little bit more compassion for why it is that they found their way there and why they're doing what they do. And so perhaps maybe there are things that you would do a little differently than just straight up pesticides, to handle it. Or you go down to the beach and you see a wrapper on the beach and you pick it up because you're thinking about your soul animal, possibly ingesting it, and just little things like that might be the big changes eventually down the line. That's a hope.
I
It's a hope.
I I love that. And with that, I want to ask you,
Good.
what is a soul animal?
So, soul animal is a species specific animal that represents your core energy frequency, i.e., your soul, right? And we're removing the context of like religion, just more talking about the energy life force that gives our body the ability to be animated and in some way have some sort of consciousness about it, right? So my gift is being able to see that as a very specific animal, down to breed, down to the colors. Even sometimes, like I could see like a quarter horse, and I could see that it's a palomino, for example, right? And that in itself, those nuances will help us explore what it is to be your human self, right? So the animal is an archetype, if you will, that we can pull from and explore using the biology and the symbolism so that a person can start to understand what they're bringing to the table just by being in a room. And then from there, they can choose what's best for them and their quote unquote animal in any given moment. It's not really that there's an animal there. It's more so that it is the representation of the thing that we don't see, but we definitely feel and definitely have. And so from that, like that's where like I think everything can kind of expand from. So it's a little different than an animal guide, even though your soul animal is a guide to those around you. But it's a little different than an animal guide on the outside of you. So sometimes animals show up in physical form, like you might be on your back porch in a certain bird lands, or you keep seeing the same logo of a specific animal over and over again. You go to a guided meditation and they talk about butterflies or dragonflies, right? Or you might have dreams of specific animals. These are ways that I believe spirit, universe, is talking to us because animals are a loud language that we can all pay attention to. And that comes from a very anthropological background, right? Like human beings want to survive. So those who pay attention to their environments have a better chance, right?
Yeah.
So by paying attention to your environment, you can get clues as to where you are physically, and then if you take that a next step, you can get clues as to where you are emotionally, mentally, spiritually, right? So animals have been a big part of humans and their cultures and identities and way of life since we've been around, you know. But the soul animal is the animal that's within, the animal that is the core part of who you are, and everything else gets built on top of that. So it's a little different. It's not a guide animal that's letting you know where you are. You have to kind of do the interpretive work on that to know where you are. It's like looking at a map going, okay, I'm here. But who is I in the I'm here? That's the animal.
What, if any, is the difference, and I'm sure you've gotten this too, between a soul animal and a spirit animal? Is there a difference, or spirit guide, or animal
Yes,
totem? What's it?
yes. So early on in the early days of when I started doing this, I actually called what I do spirit animal work.
Hmm.
Mostly because I was still developing what it was that I do. I was still trying to come to terms with what it was that I was picking up on. I called it spirit animal work because when I looked up anything about animals in a spiritual context or like an intuitive context, that's what would come up, you know? It kind of still falls into that category. And I'll explain why here in a second. But over the years, the more and more I did it, and the more people I spoke to, and the more research I did in the concepts surrounding various cultures and practices that include animals as a part of their spiritual thing, right? I decided I would change it to soul animal because I was talking about an animal that represented that soul signature, right? So you are a spirit animal guide because of your soul animal, right? So your moth is guiding me today as my fox is guiding you today. And of course, all the listeners, right? But the animal that we're discussing is the soul animal. And as it applies to you, it's a spirit animal. So fox's soul animal is your spirit animal guide today. That's kind of the differentiation. So for me, I in the words I use, I say spirit animal, and what I mean is like any animal really that shows up in a spiritual context to help guide me as to where I am in my life right now. So like yesterday afternoon, I was sitting here at my friend's house and I looked outside and there was a cottontail rabbit out in the field behind me, right? So I would consider that, even though it is a fully formed, tangible animal in my space, I consider that a spirit animal guide to me, who is Fox.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Um, And I would also ask, like, in terms of the soul, if we go with the belief that our soul has lived more than one life, right? This is merely
Mm-hmm.
meat suit, but our soul is eternal. Do you feel or know or believe that our soul animal is the same in each incarnation, or do they change?
I believe it's the same.
You
And the
believe it's the
reason why
same.
I go with that is, and I'm by no means a physicist at all, but the bits and pieces that I've learned and I've come to understand, right? Energy cannot be destroyed, it simply moves. And
Mm,
so if our soul is a form of energy, then that energy is constant throughout every lifetime. So theoretically, our bodies die because there's no more energy to propel them through the living process. So that energy source doesn't just go, it moves. And so my working theory, and again, like it's theory because that's all it
Sure.
can be, right? But there's a part that's belief too. My working theory is that every lifetime you are that same animal. So, theoretically speaking, in a past life, if you found out you were a baker, right, then that baker had the soul of a moth. And maybe before that, a settler somewhere in Mongolia, moth, and whatever that is, like, whatever people find out, that might be the tool to help them better understand why they're having this iteration of their story. Because past life regression work, which is really fascinating stuff, and we won't get into that because that's another 5 hours, right? But past life regression work, the whole point of going in and learning is to see what kinds of things you've carried over with you and how to settle up with it, basically. It's a type of debt. And so perhaps like in that past life, if you know that you were a moth and you know the themes that moth energies carry with them, and then you find out kind of how that life played out, then you could kind of figure out how to help yourself in this life alleviate that debt to move forward into the next iteration. Again, this is all based on these theories and practices, but it's an applicable way of going about it. If you wanted to, you could go, okay, I know I'm a fox energy. I've had work done where I understand my past life and I understand like what has been coming through. And so now I can say, okay, how much of this do I want to continue carrying with me? Is this where some of my hangups are, where my shadow work needs processing, all that fun stuff? And then you can use the animal as a tool to navigate that space.
I love that. So, one thing that I've been curious about from, 7 years, whenever it was ago that I
Yeah.
initially first like made contact, um, when someone comes to you for a reading and before you get on the phone call with them, what is your method from start to that phone call of determining someone's soul animal? How do you do it?
Okay. So if it's going to be like a phone call or Zoom call where it's at a distance, typically what I've asked people to do is send me a photo of themselves, right? The photo is more about me having almost a security blanket in the process, right? Because then I know I've got a target that I'm working towards reading. For me, it's just been a many year, decade and a half long process to have the photo as a form of like just connection point.
Mm.
Now, once I receive the photo and I look at it and I'm in a space where I'm going to read the person's signature, I actually put the photo away. I have mental images. I have like a mental visualization, almost like recalling a memory or like remembering something in a space. So I'm not actually seeing the person's animal in the space, but I can pull it up as if it is in my mind. So like I can look at you and then I can also like simultaneously visualize your Cecropia moth and like see her, but like I'm not seeing her. I'm kind of just paying attention to the mental image of her. So my claircognizance is a form of like mentalization. And yeah, their animal presents themselves and I immediately go into a quote unquote conversation with that animal and write down my notes, write down some of the things that are coming through. And that's kind of how I set myself up, especially if I have a long day full of sessions. And, having a background in veterinary science helps, and having to take all those anatomy and physiology classes. Also, being that kid who read every single plaque at the zoo and aquarium growing up and at the museums, right? We had National Geographics at home. Like I was like in it. Any animal book I could absorb, I would. So it helps to be able to say, okay, I know that shape of teeth, or
Mhm.
I recognize that fur type, or I know those scales, like those scales definitely belong to this class of animal. So at that point, then I have to kind of really take a step back and scan some more to get the nuances. Like, okay, silver scales on a fish, that could be any number of thousands, hundreds of thousands of fish out there, right? So I have to look for nuance. It's that process. But I still, once I've gotten that information, that initial information, I'm still going to connect with that animal in that specific space because the person, even though that's their animal, is having their own experience. And that's the nuance work that comes next after that. So the process is then getting on the call with the person, introducing them to the animal, and then bringing up the things that came forward right away so that we could start working through that. And sometimes it's a one and done. Sometimes it's years between sessions,
Mm.
and sometimes it's a lot of sessions. So it just depends. But they do change because we, as human beings, through our life, we change. The soul animal doesn't change. The conversation changes.
That makes it again, I gotta liken it back to shadow work. It's something
Yeah,
that
that's
is
exactly it.
ongoing. It's never done. And around that, has anyone ever had an adverse reaction to their soul animal and
Most
why?
definitely. Most definitely they have. Especially early on. Maybe that was in part, I can take some of the weight of that. Maybe that was in part of how I delivered it early on because I didn't quite know exactly what I was doing or why that would matter to a person that much. For example, I had a girl who came to see me. She got her animal and she was so excited she brought her friend who was not necessarily comfortable with the setting of a metaphysical space and whatever to
Mm,
begin with. And instead of reading that, I just kind of launched into it. Now, that particular girl's animal was a beaver. And anybody who knows anything about beavers knows that structure is a very important part of their culture, right? Laying down a strong foundation before building up your house of sticks is very important. And I threw her in quickly, like into the mix, and she was very like, no, 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 no. She didn't have an understanding of what we were really talking about, and I didn't really have a full understanding of what we were talking about either to help her through that. So she had a very adverse reaction. Other types of people who've had adverse reactions, I read a woman who was a spider one time, and I might as well have told her she had one on her face, and she didn't like it. you know, um, she didn't like that at all. So it took several times talking with her to help her understand what that was about. Another woman she was an older woman who came to me. She was a type of bird. And for the sake of the story, I'll just kind of leave it at that. However, the reason why she had a problem with it being a bird, it was just the fact that it was a bird, not even the type of bird, which would have had
Mm,
nothing to do with it, was because she grew up in the time when Hitler came through in Poland and had to deal with all of that. And her father was killed, and she became kind of the head of the household because her mother shut down. And the reason why she had a problem with birds was because Hitler, one of the symbols used by the Nazis, is an eagle, and she had nothing to do with that. She wanted to be something else, something that was more
yeah.
about protection, something that was more about standing up for her family and being there for her family, because that is what she felt she really identified as. When I encounter those types of people, who are having that kind of resistance, I always tell them, okay, let's talk about where the resistance is, because that tells me what's going on with you more than it is your relationship with that animal, right? Like
Hmm.
if somebody tells me, ew, I don't like that animal, it's ugly, I already know right then and there, as you know, as a shadow worker, right? Like where the issue is and what we need to talk about.
Hmm.
So when I encounter those kinds of situations, I always tell everybody, you don't have to like your animal, you don't have to accept it, you don't have to integrate it, you don't have to use it. You came to me. Like I don't go around going, you have to do this and that's what you have to do, right? Like so you came to me, I did what I do, and it's up to you to take that into consideration and put it into play or not. There have been people who have had adverse reactions to their animals who have come back years later, and they have finally like worked through it, and they've come back to discuss how they finally found it, but it took time.
Mm,
And that's been
mm.
really beautiful to see. Had a session with this wonderful girl who had saved up to come see me. She sat down, and when I visualized her animal, it was a chicken, a type of chicken, and I realized I had an issue with the fact that it was a chicken. So I avoided saying the word chicken. I started talking about all the things that I knew were great about chickens. I was talking about like, the exchange and the abundance and the giving and the fertility and all of this stuff, right? And I was painting what I believe to be this beautiful, beautiful picture. And finally she stopped me, as I'm glad she did, and she said, "So what am I?" Because I was drawing it out. And I said, "Okay, just so you know, like it's going to be okay. Like just bear with me. We'll work through this." What? Like I look back at myself and I cringe, right? And she goes, "So what is it?" And I said, "Okay, so you're a chicken." And her tear, like she started to well up with tears. And I was like, "It's okay, it's okay." And then she gave me the biggest smile. And she said, "No, that makes me so happy." And I said, "Oh." And that's telling you a lot about where I was at that time. That was nearly like 12, 13 years ago now, right? But she goes, "Yeah, when I was a little girl, we had chickens and I used to sneak my favorite hen into the house and she'd sleep with me at night. My parents hated it, but my
Oh,
father's nickname for me as a little girl was Chicken. He'd be like, 'Hey, Chicken.'" And she's like, "They're my favorite. I collect chicken statues. I have chicken stuff all over the place. I want to farm one day so that I can have chickens. I love them so much." She's like, "This is perfect. All of that makes so much sense to me." And it was in that moment, while I was glad for her experience, I had to check myself moving forward. I said, "No more. I'm not going to hold back just because I think that a person's going to hate it, because that's me thinking. That's not me trusting."
yeah, yeah, it's a personal bias. And as humans, I mean, I grapple with that as well. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's being able to know ourselves well enough to be able to detect it and observe it and go, okay, that's a personal bias. Let me
Mm-hmm.
get my eyes on that so that I can ask it to move to the side and keep it moving. And I have another question, which,
Please,
so in shadow work, I'm going to talk about shadow work, you know.
please, please. I love
I'm a
it.
moth. It's what I do. In shadow work, I found something that was when I was navigating through it initially and coming up with my own method of doing so intuitively. I thought, well, I need to know my shadow animal, which is very much like a soul animal, but it represents the signature of my shadow in
Mm-hmm.
expression, right? And I found that the answer to this was an animal that in my youth absolutely terrified me. And to this day, when that shadow animal comes into my mind's eye to work with me, it has taken me a sincere amount of time to, even
Mm-hmm.
in meditation where there's no danger whatsoever, to interact with it without the visceral, like, uh, really. And that animal is bull shark.
Interesting.
That is my shadow animal, and it's
Interesting.
something, it's fascinating. And I, even to this day, I think I it's been a relationship that the more I foster and the more I'm open to it helps work with me. But it is so interesting how that has come into play in my life, and what that animal represents for me. Part of it being my psychology from my formative years, which is when our shadows formed. So
Yes.
it's all kind of connected in that way. My question for you is,
Mm-hmm.
your shadow animal, do you have any sense, have you ever had thought or feeling about what that might be?
My shadow animal.
Yeah.
I would imagine if I do have a shadow animal or shadow animals, it would be a human. Maybe my human self. I,
Interesting.
I say that just through like philosophical like musing, right? Because like being human is tough, you know? And I think that that's why I'm here. I think that's why any of us is here as a human, right? Like is to learn this. There have been numerous times where I've been wanting to be my animal more in a situation. And
Mm,
I've found that all of the formative years and the establishing of the shadow exists within the human self, right? So
yeah.
there's parts of me that I think are just really afraid of having to concede to being human. I recognize it's not that I'm completely denouncing being human, because here I am. So I would have to say that if I had to pick an animal that would be my shadow animal, it would be the human being.
Wow. Very, that's really fascinating, and I'm going to think about that like for a
Yeah, I
while.
know, just yeah,
Um,
not to cause existentialism or a crises
I
for
mean,
anybody out there.
it is deep though. It's interesting because there's no right or wrong. I think
Yeah,
in terms of like the individual, again, it's a way to contextualize something that can be very, amorphous. It's like, oh, it's a shadow. What does it come from? What does it say? What is it doing? Why do I need to know this? Is this my shadow or is it something else? The id, the persona, I mean, all of it, right? Because
yeah,
in its origins, it's a psychological term, right? Jung coined it, and we're taking it and we're looking at it through a somewhat, very spiritual
yes,
lens. And so for me, I think as an animal lover myself and someone who works with animal energy in a different way from you, but also I absolutely, love it so much. And I feel a comfort with it that just feels very homey to me. For me, that shadow animal is a way for me to interact with that aspect of myself in a way that feels not just very productive and not just very revealing, but
mm,
active.
yes,
It's me putting that shadow. Maybe an aspect of me is putting my shadow in the role of shark to
hmm,
say, okay, we have some stuff to work through. Hey, I have an issue. I don't know how to get around it. I don't know how to look at it from another perspective. What I'm doing as moth isn't really working. Can you help me? And then the shark, comes in that space and goes, "Ooh, look at me. You can't breathe under here. Interesting. How does that make you feel? Ooh, we're in the
yeah.
great unknown. You
Oh,
might like all
what
of
a
that. I
phenomenal
mean,
guide for that. Sharks are, and they've been around.
oh,
They have
hello.
been around. Talk about something primordial and like deep, pun intended. Like, yeah, there are certain animals in my guide team. So like animals that I know show up for me in various forms that show up at very key points that I would do well, not need to, but I would do well to take note of. And there are certain animals that show up specifically, and especially ones that I have connections with, like personal connections with, maybe childhood connections with. Orcas were a big part of my childhood. They're like my number one favorite animal. I could talk about them all day, every day, anytime anybody wants to talk about them. And I learned a lot about them and almost got to work with them coming out of college, and that didn't end up happening. And honestly, I'm okay about it. But to finally get to see them in the wild the last 2 years, um, and then how they show up very rarely in dreams tells me a lot about where I'm at psychologically, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. So that's a big animal that I would have thought that I would have been had I not been a red fox. I was kind of, when I found out about my fox,
Interesting.
I was like, well, I thought I'd be an orca. I love orcas. They're my favorite. Orcas are definitely guide animals. As are a couple other animals. Certain types of owls will show up for me. People from my family that have passed, their animals will show up as guide animals for me. So I know that it's about ancestral work, that kind of thing. And
Sure.
that all feeds into shadow work in a lot of ways too. So there are animals that are a part of my guide team that surely do make a big presence, and make themselves known. And I usually can tell when they're trying to get my attention because whenever I'm doing a session, like I am taking note of the theme of that day, right? Like I'm taking note of what animals came through and what we were talking about and what that could actually mean for me too, because it is a two-way street, just like your tarot card readings, or any kind of intuitive work. It is a two-way street. As a shadow
Mm.
worker, you're going to have to walk the walk and be in the realm of shadow yourself while you're helping another person be in the realm of shadow. You can't be like, hi, I'm just going to stand over here and not deal with my own stuff. That's the magic of all of this. So, yeah, you know.
That's really well said. I'll tell you a funny story. When you did my reading initially, I had in mind what I thought I was going to. I think most people do, and this was an animal that I was so drawn to as a child, and that was snake. And I just, when you said, Cecropia moth, it took me a second to go, what kind of snake is that? I was like, wait, she's saying moth. Like I had it like I swear to God, like I had it
Yeah.
so in my mind. I think even before the reading, I was like, "Snake, be with me for this reading." Like, I really was so sure, and it's so interesting because as you were talking about, I'll never forget it. You were saying how moths are masters of camouflage, and how their wings, that kind of can look like a snake or an owl, or and so many of the themes, as I came to learn, the transformation, the shedding and the shadow. There were so many parallels. And I remember coming out of that reading, and I didn't have an adverse reaction to it. I was just
No.
surprised. I
Hmm.
was just genuinely, because everything that you said resonated. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I think we're on the wrong call or something. It resonated. I just had never considered moms. I started noticing that I lived in a very brownstone from like 1901
Oh,
in the
wow.
New York
Pretty.
City area. Oh my God, like stunning. And I just started to notice that there was all of these moths. I would open a closet in the hallway and they would fly out. They started getting into my apartment and in the hallways, and they were just absolutely everywhere. And around the same time, a company had bought my building, and they wanted me to leave so that they could renovate my apartment, flip it, and put it on the market for twice as much. And I said, no, I'm not going anywhere. I live here. I'm good. Thank you very much.
Hmm.
Goodbye. Offered me money. They offered, I mean, this was like, went on and on and on. And they sent me a letter and said, after I was, really saying I'm not going to leave, go, it's come to our notice that there is a moth infestation. And we've realized that, we've had people come and look, and there's nothing that can be done about it. So we just need to say that there's a moth infestation, and to just, beware, and try to close the door behind you, and don't keep anything that would attract. And I started laughing. I just had this reading with you, and I thought, I'm refusing to leave. They're trying to kick me out of my cocoon. Then they all come and they're swarming everywhere. And the management is just like pulling their hair out, going, oh my God, they're getting in the walls. They're doing all this stuff. My God, the tenants upstairs are complaining. And we have moths that won't leave. And I just thought, oh, I had it was such an
That's
confirmation of the way that came through, and it kind of connected me to a power source in a way as well. They tend to get their way. You know like I resonate, and that is such a like a funny moment for me, especially because I just really was so sure that it was something else. I wanted to ask you, like, on a final last fun note. So, Cecropia moth, fox, what can they learn from each other? How do they play?
good question. So I guess I'll start with fox energy. Um, Foxes when they show up. So this is if you're out on a walk and you see a fox cross your path, or you keep seeing foxes show up during every autumn sale ever, like as a motif, or if you have a dream about them. However, foxes in general are going to be some sort of illumination. Now, with illumination comes shadow, right? So you're getting both sides of the picture, and shadow is important for definition. It's important for depth. So that's kind of the realm of foxes. But specifically, what I always say is, if you're seeing a fox, try to shift your perspective into one of seeing it as it is, not seeing it through the lens of what you want it to be. And that's tough to do because, like, on some level, we all want things to be something that is attainable, understandable, and comfortable. But the Fox message is about like being able to see it for what it is and as it is, and then from there operate on what you do next. So a lot of foxes will find themselves, fox soul energies will find themselves in situations where people might be avoiding or
Mm.
trying to shift the situation into one that makes more sense for them. And they're kind of wanting something else out of it. So if you oversimplify it, foxes tend to find themselves in families, like in karmic families, energetic ecosystems where they are surrounded by people who are doing things like this. I don't understand how it's so dark. I don't get it. Why is it so dark in here? And what foxes have to learn is that like we can't be the ones holding their hands back, prying their eyes open, turning on the lights, lighting the fire. Like we're the ones who have to do it for ourselves and let those figure out that they have to see it and incorporate it into their own. Now, that being said, the moth's also a shadow animal, right? Which it makes absolute sense that you ended up doing shadow work and writing your book about it. With moths, typically what I keep in mind is the presence of moths means that there is some sort of interpersonal dynamic that's going to come through. And it sounds so strange, but I'll explain here in a second. That's going to come through in letter form. So when I write down, like I saw moths today, I usually draw like a little picture of an envelope because it's about paying attention to something that's coming through written form. In this day and age, mail is not something that happens all that often. So I say, check your emails, check your messages, pay attention to who reaches out to you, especially
Mm,
those who don't usually do it very often. So moths bring a message, an important message. Butterflies are about transformation, and moths have that obviously because they go through similar transformation. But I think it's more transformative in the grand scheme of things in terms of like your destiny or your path or your fate, if you will. So moths kind of bring that. There's a lot of school of thought that moths are also associated with relationships, like romantic relationships. So when you come across moths, there's an opportunity that there could be something growing in that way, or it's an opportunity to understand the relationship you have with yourself. So
mm,
there's aspects of that. Because every animal has different things that it does to their spaces. You want to pay attention to the traits that that animal carries. Because the Cecropia specifically is so large, and it has the design where it looks like it's an owl, it looks like it has snakes in its wings, that kind of thing. I would take into account those animals as well. Snakes about transformation, letting go to grow, owls about warnings, right? So if that's the case, if you're carrying that as a form of defense system to get your message across, then there could be something in that for those around you to learn and put into play as well. So how we play together, well, we're doing it.
yeah.
Communication, talking about the deeper parts of the mind and behavioral psychology and the love of the esoteric. That's exactly how you and I, as our animals, get our excitement up, like, because that's the realm that we love to be in. We like to move in the liminal space
Mm,
and explore what is and what isn't and how to transform. In a way, your animal is quite literally a shape-shifting animal, whereas foxes are shapeshifters in story in a different way, the way that
mm,
they show up. So I could learn a lot by learning phases from you, learning when, learning like how and why to change and shift. And for you, you could also learn to uh, loosen your grip on some of the transformative process too. And I venture, dare I say, to bring up that bull shark, right? Sharks move forward in the water, they can't go backwards, right? So
mm.
learning to progress forward, learning how to keep moving. Don't stagnate too long. Even in the cocoon, still there's still transformation, there's still progression. So don't stagnate.
Oh,
you
that
know?
oh, I
Yeah.
feel that so deeply. It's interesting, and I want to end on this note because I would be remiss not mentioning Crow. I mean, um, I was thinking about this in a way, and I was thinking about when you were going to talk today, and I thought, like, you and I have not talked about Crow very much. We've talked about
Mm-mm.
Moth and but for me, Crow is, how Beyonce has Sasha Fierce. It's like her
Yes.
persona that she calls upon to go out in the public and like wow the masses.
Yeah.
Crow is my Sasha Fierce. That is the energy that I work with and call upon and ask to, be with me so that I can be in public, so that I can be that person, that I can use my voice and be
Mm-hmm.
loud and laugh my cackle and do all of the things that innately feel like, very honestly, very tiring for me. I feel
Yeah.
very, very tired. I spent the majority of my life as a professional actor. And
Yeah.
I found it to be, the more that I was on stage, the more I, was in people watching, filming, whatever it was, I really had to do an equal but opposite reaction. I had to be alone. I had to be quiet. I had to, nobody look at me. Nobody call
Yeah.
me. Do not ask anything of me. I am
Yeah.
unavailable. I just
Mm-hmm.
did a play. I just did a film. Right. I had people looking at me. So that energy of Crow, which is so beautifully extroverted, so in your face, so I'm here, I'm Crow, and I'm not going anywhere. That is such an
Yeah.
energy that I feel like, is my Sasha Fierce, is my other
Yeah.
persona.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your crow is kind of like, oh, are they the heralds that usually precede the arrival of royalty? It's the person who arrives ahead of the entourage, or
Mm,
so your crow is kind of like the way I use fox, to introduce myself. It's setting the tone for you to be in that space. It's another guardian for that energy that you want to protect and take care of. We talked about it at the very beginning. You were just coming out of all of those years of professional acting, and we were talking about
mm,
how people want you to be the moth because that's more palatable. And yet, that is actually the hardest time in the entire life cycles for the Cecropia moth. As much as they are beautiful, and everybody's like, that's what I want to pin to a wall and put on in a frame, like because that's people are like, wow, that's what I want, I want that. Where's that? The painted wings, the majesty, but they don't have mouths, they don't eat, and their life cycle at that part is the end. That's the end of the entirety of it. So in this particular case, like it makes sense that you have wanted this animal who has a little bit more stamina, if you will, like energetic
mm.
stamina, to be the front runner for you. They're the ones who can say all the words, and then you don't have to really do all of that. It's kind of like, you know, uh, there's a stage manager, and then like you just show up, stand on your mark, and then say what you need to say, and then you get off stage, and then the stage manager's still working. They're still like there behind the scenes getting everybody where they need to go. That is not you. You're not made for that.
No.
But being in the limelight, it's tiring because you come off of doing a play, people want to talk to you, there's after parties, there's rehearsals again, there's like getting there early, sleeping late. It's just too much.
Mm.
And for you to finally realize that while you enjoyed aspects of it, the entirety as a package was not for you, you came off of that and created Crow to Row, right? Like where you were able to compartmentalize all of it and give yourself some space. So it
That's a
makes
brilliant way
sense.
to put it. Yeah,
It makes
that's a
sense.
brilliant way to put
Well,
compartmentalizing it. Yeah.
and it's a powerful symbol. You're absolutely right. Like the crow in itself is a symbol of, owning your magic, very much like ravens, which we talked about
Hmm.
recently, owning your magic, owning your authenticity, finding your voice, which, for a while you were actually very protective of a lot of yourself in the early years of your YouTube.
That's
Anybody
true.
who goes back far enough will be able to see
Just
that.
the
But
hands.
yeah, just the hands, you know, um, but and which was fine, and I actually really appreciated that you gave yourself that conscious time, because that was your way of making sure that you weren't going too quickly to the point where your wings weren't fully formed or you weren't fully like nourished. You were giving yourself room to figure out exactly what
Mm.
you wanted. And that's another thing that, your animal can teach all of us is take your time, because when it's going to arrive, it will arrive and you will recognize it, you know? And you're
That
right.
is beautiful.
Yeah, and you're right about the moths at the place in New York, right? Like you guys were all there. You, them, and you made it very clear, and you said it. You said once moths kind of make up their mind, it's kind of like, well, that's what's happening. right? You're
Get
right.
in.
There is due process for sure.
Mhm.
So yeah, we help each other, and all of our animals help each other in different ways. The whole concept is that everything's a energy, right? And we are a part of this energetic ecosystem, and we each have parts to play within it, right?
Mhm.
So your family that you're born to and or raised by, the people that you get involved with romantically or through a business setting, the grocery store, all of these places are mini micro ecosystems that are supposed to be benefiting from your presence. And you will then, in turn, benefit from the presence of those other quote unquote animals. And that's kind of the whole premise of this work, right? So we get to have this exchange, we get to have this opportunity to mm, help each other become the best versions of ourselves. One thing I say a lot is that, the lion doesn't know how much of a lion they are until they meet a zebra, and the zebra doesn't know how much of a zebra they are until they meet that lion. You've heard me say it before,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
So, like, my fox is getting to know my fox better because I'm talking to a moth. And hopefully, your moth is getting to know your moth better by talking to a fox and
Mm.
doing so honestly, doing so candidly, vulnerably, proudly. All of those things can be in one place simultaneously. And that's what shadow work usually helps people attain, right? So, um,
1,000%. I love that so, so much.
mhm.
Thank you so much for
Yeah,
your time. This has been just so fun. I am so excited for, those my lovely chromies to watch this and contact you. I'll have in the beginning of the video and the description box below, as always, your info, how to
awesome.
get a hold of you, how to book that
Thank
reading.
you.
And I encourage everybody to also, book in for their husbands, their children, their parents, and all of those.
Of course, like with parents and their children, that's a great space, so that there's an opportunity to learn how to communicate with one another better. So yes, that
Yeah.
is that is totally available. Just talk to me.
Love it. So again, thank you so, so much. I'll have all of your
Yeah,
information in the description box. And
thank you.
I am excited for everyone who is going to book in with you to have that initial journey of learning your soul animal. And yeah, it's very exciting. I have a part in my newsletter every month where it says, my current obsession. And you and what you do and that initial reading from years ago has continued to be an obsession of mine. I always get something out of it the more I look at it from another angle. I remember something you said. It's really stood the test of time and continues to inform me. And and this is major, knowing that animal and having that understanding has absolutely led me to shadow work, my book, my deck, everything that is going on. It helped in a way lead me to my marriage, to motherhood. I mean, I can really trace it back to so many things because all of that came out of a deeper awareness, which is the real gift, in my opinion, of what you do. And it
Thank
is
you.
at its core shadow work because of that. So you really are doing you really are doing the work, and it's very important. And I'm so
Oh,
excited for everyone to book in with you. So thank you so, so much for
thank you so much.